Hi all, this is going to be our first mini lecture for our second week of online content. I'm actually recording this on Monday the 23rd, it's actually our first day of online content, and we are as a state about to enter our sort of shelter in place order, so I just want to start this off by saying I hope everybody's still doing okay, and again, if you have any concerns or issues or things that you think I need to know, please feel free to contact me immediately and let me know. I'm trying to be flexible and work with everybody because I know things are just absolutely insane right now. So, yeah. Okay, so hopefully last week went okay. At this point, you should have completed chapter 11, all the muscle stuff, hopefully be working through that muscle worksheet and or done with it already. This week, we're moving into a completely different organ system. This is the organ system that we will stay in for the rest of the semester. So we're going to start with the nervous system today, chapter 12, and then go from there. The remaining 4 or 5 weeks of class are all going to be on the nervous system. So it is an incredibly complex system. There's a lot about it we still don't know. We are going to do our best to sort of break it into pieces and understand it sort of chunk by chunk. I do want to say that I think our textbook is lacking in detail, and I also find the organization of the next series of chapters to be a little bit different from how I tend to want to present it. So I'm still going to use our textbook as sort of the loose framework, but I'm going to fill in with a lot of detail and change the order of some of our content around. So you'll notice that the lectures and the PowerPoints don't necessarily line up exactly with our textbook. If you're taking notes before the lectures, you may need to flip between a couple of chapters. I'll try and do my best to sort of let you know when that's happening. But it's a little bit harder now that I don't see you every day and I'm not reminded sort of constantly about that. So, again, I would encourage you to still be reading the textbook and using it to enhance your understanding. But for this next set of chapters, perhaps focusing more on the lecture content, supplemental content, worksheets will serve you better. So just keep that in mind as we advance in this particular system. As always, I'm going to start off this chapter by looking at our overall objectives. We have a lot of stuff to talk about usually, and what we'll continue to do in this chapter is start with our simplest level of organization. So in the nervous system, our simplest level of organization is going to be the cells that carry out the function. In this case, these are called neurons, right? So we talked about muscle cells, we talked about bone cells. Now we're going to talk about nerve cells or neurons. Okay, so these are our sort of cells, primary cells of the nervous system. We're going to work up from there to our much higher levels of complexity, which is our, like our organ level. This is what we'll get into over the course of the next couple of weeks. We'll talk about the brain, the spinal cord, and our nerves. So these are sort of future weeks. This is primarily what we're going to talk about this week is what are our neurons, how do they behave, and how do they carry out the function of this system. So we're actually going to take a big step back and we're going to first focus on the divisions of our nervous system and then move into the different types of tissues, the different types of cells, what makes them act like neurons, what are the characteristics of our neurons, and how do they send messages from place to place. This is just a quote that I came across at some point, and I thought that it was sort of poignant about the nervous system. We are moving into a system that is sort of our foundation for consciousness, our understanding of experiences, our personality, our behavior. This is in no way a field that is thoroughly researched at this point. We are constantly learning new things, understanding new interactions in the nervous system and other organ systems. It's just widely complex. So if it seems a little bit complicated and confusing to you, you're not alone. We're going to try and sort of break it down and work through it in a way that makes sense to all of us. So just try and hang in there with us. So when we think back to probably the first or second week of this class, we talked a little bit about homeostasis and how all of our cells and all of the cells in our bodies really have to work together in a really coordinated fashion in order for us to maintain any type of homeostasis. We actually have two organ systems that are heavily involved in coordination and communication between cells and between organ systems. They employ either electrical signals or chemical signals. Typically, the system that uses electrical signals is going to be our nervous system. I almost put an E on that. That is the nervous system. I definitely spelled that right. Chemical signals also from the nervous system. Whoops. Oh, starting this off really well. All right. Chemical messengers also employed by the nervous system, but also going to be in the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is going to be our other major organ system that is responsible for communication and coordinating. We see the endocrine system very heavily in next semester. So as you move into the 202 class, you'll talk about the endocrine system, and then you'll see how the endocrine system works and impacts all of the different organ systems. So I wanted to point it out here that this is one of our systems that is involved in this process, but it is not the one we're going to focus on now. So when we have chemical messengers, sometimes they come from the endocrine system. For our purposes now, we're going to focus sort of exclusively on the nervous system. The nervous system is going to use electrical signals primarily within a nerve cell, so within a neuron. Chemical messengers are used to communicate from cell to cell. So we send electrical signals within a single cell, where our chemical messengers are sort of cell to cell communication. We have three functions or basic steps in how the nervous system responds and carries out actions. So those are listed here. They are sensation, integration, and response. Sensation is going to be where the nervous system receives input about the body or the environment, and that information is sent from the body or the environment into our central nervous system. I know we haven't defined divisions of the nervous system yet, but we will on the next slide. So for now, we'll just say the central nervous system. So this is going to be input about, I'm just going to say conditions. That can be internal or external environment conditions. So either something that's happening inside of the body or a response to room temperature or sunlight or pain on the outside of the body. So input about conditions are going to be sent to the central nervous system. This is going to be our processing region. We process, we integrate, and we make decisions about material. That's our next step, actually. So the central nervous system processes and makes decisions. And then the response piece is going to be the central nervous system sending commands to muscles and glands. So they are responding to our initial sensation. This is the foundation for everything we're going to talk about with the nervous system. We're going to talk about each of these pieces. We'll talk about the neurons and the regions and the organs that are involved in each of these. Here's the sort of schematic of that. We have a stimulus. So for just the sake of ease, let's say the stimulus is you step on a nail. Okay, so we have pain receptors. When you step on that nail, those pain receptors recognize that you have damaged your tissue. They use neurons to send that information to our processing location, which is our central nervous system. Right, so that's sensation into integration. The central nervous system can take that information and sort of bounce it around from place to place, depending on what the initial stimulus was. Once the central nervous system has recognized what's happening, so we've integrated and made a decision about how we need to respond, we'll send that message back out a neuron and then to what we would call an effector, which is one of our muscles or glands, and we respond. So if our stimulus is stepping on a nail, the receptors are going to be pain receptors. That information goes to the central nervous system. Our brain is going to say, something hurts. Okay, it's my toe. Okay, something has punctured my skin. All right, now we need to send the message to our leg muscles to pull the foot back, right? So to respond by removing that pain. Okay, so this is, again, our pathway. This is simple, should be easy to sort of comprehend. This is what we are going to come back to time and time again as we are explaining each piece along here. Okay, so let's now talk about the major divisions of the nervous system. So we can break the nervous system down into two major pieces. The first one is the central nervous system. The central nervous system is always going to be the brain and the spinal cord. And this is the brain is going to be in the cranium and the spinal cord is going to be in the vertebral column. Any neuron or nervous cell or tissue that is outside of the central nervous system is part of the peripheral nervous system. I don't know why it does that. So if we have the nervous system, as a whole, we would break the nervous system down into the central nervous system and then into the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is then also broken down into our sensory division and our motor division. So the sensory division is going to be that first step where we are carrying signals from receptors to the central nervous system. The motor division is going to be on the opposite side of that. So once it goes to the central nervous system, that information comes back out the motor division, and that is going to be our response. So we are sensing something and we are responding to something. All right, so we make it even more complex and we break down the sensory and motor divisions even further. So let's go to the next slide and see that. Now that we know what our first couple of divisions are, central nervous system versus peripheral nervous system, I guess I should say the peripheral nervous system is going to be, like I said, anything outside of the brain or spinal cord. Mostly we would call these nerves, right? Nerves are collections of either sensory neurons or motor neurons that send messages to or from the central nervous system. So the sensory division we break down into either being visceral or somatic. Visceral is going to be our sort of thoracic and abdominal organs. Whereas somatic is going to be receptors that are found in the skin, the muscle, bone, and joints. Okay. The motor division we similarly break down into somatic and visceral. Somatic is going to respond by sending messages to our muscles. Okay, so this is we also would include in this category somatic reflexes. Visceral is going to be signals to glands and involuntary muscles. So we can kind of think of this as being voluntary control and this being involuntary control. Okay, so the motor division, some of these neurons are going to send messages to a skeletal muscle, and we can decide when we do or do not move that. Some of these are going to send messages to, let's say, the smooth muscle that lines our iris. So pupil opening or closing your pupil, right? We don't control that. It's part of our visceral motor response when the stimulus comes in, that we have too much sunlight or not enough sunlight. We, of course, can further divide the visceral motor division into either the sympathetic or parasympathetic. So sympathetic is used to arouse the body. So we would often call this fight, flight, or freeze responses. Okay, so if you're confronted with a scenario, the sympathetic nervous system is going to help you decide whether you should run, whether you should fight, or whether you should just stay still. Parasympathetic, we often call this rest and digest, but this one is going to calm the body. So when you're just hanging out, watching TV, nothing's imminent or no emergencies have come up, your parasympathetic nervous system is controlling your digestion, your urine production, your heart rate. Everything is nice and sort of chill, calm the body. So that's your rest and digest nervous system. The only other thing that I want to mention here that I forgot is the visceral. I'm going to add some more lines to make this even more confusing. We also call this the autonomic nervous system. And so you will hear that term quite frequently. So autonomic nervous system. Okay, so I am going to cover one more slide in this mini lecture, which I think leaves us at a really good place for the next one. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here again is just sort of going back to our idea of the basic functions. I'm just going to talk through these quickly. I'm not going to write a lot down on this slide. So we already know that we have sensing, integrating, and sort of responding as our three basic purposes of the nervous system, or what it's actually doing, how it coordinates and communicates is by doing these three things. So again, sensing is detection of stimulus. This can be internal or external. That information is going to be sent to the brain. Pretty much every organ in the body is going to have sensory receptors that will ultimately end in the central nervous system, right? So here in the eye, we have sensory neurons that send all of this information into the brain. The brain does that integration. All integration happens exclusively in the central nervous system. Okay, so your central nervous system receives the signals from the sensory neuron or from the receptor, takes that information and it processes it, it stores it, it uses previous experience to retrieve data, it makes decisions, and then it connects back out to the peripheral nervous system through motor neurons, which are going to ultimately respond to that stimulus. Okay, so that is the end of our first mini lecture. On the next one, we are going to talk about the structure and types of neurons and cells within the nervous system. So I will be back shortly.